to you. Are authorities, are communities doing all they can to combat violent crime? With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prison.
I'm completely stunned.
I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat. Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Morning. Good morning. It's 9:30 on Wednesday, the 7th of June. This is To The Point with me, Bev Turner, and Mark Dolan this morning.
Now, day 2 of Harry versus the Mirror. We're live at the High Court throughout the programme as the Duke of Sussex is cross-examined over claims of phone hacking.
Weight loss jabs on the NHS. The government are telling us that a new drug could change millions of lives. But is it just surrendering into what many see as a lifestyle problem? Get in touch, gbnews@gbviews.com.
I'm off to McDonald's after the show. And the least racist Western democracy. A new report to mark the Windrush anniversary praises the UK compared to other countries, but a majority of British ethnic minorities still experience everyday racism.
All of that and some fantastic stories today in our panel review. There's lots of fun to be had. Let us know your thoughts. gbviews@gbnews.com. But first of all, here are the news headlines with Aaron Armstrong.
Good morning, it's 9:32. Aaron Armstrong here in the GB newsroom. The Prime Minister has arrived in Washington, D.C. ahead of a meeting with the US President tomorrow. Rishi Sunak will meet business leaders and political figures today in an effort to strengthen economic ties. Now, the US and the UK's ongoing support for Ukraine will be on the agenda when he meets Joe Biden, along with the growing rise of China and the threat posed by AI. The Health Secretary, Steve Barclay, says it is necessary to manage those risks.
I was up at Blackpool Victoria Hospital where they're using AI to pick up cancers that wouldn't be visible to the human eye, extra 20% detection rate on those that were too small for people to see. But alongside there are risks as well to AI, so it's important we don't let those risks crowd out the opportunities. We need to look at this internationally, to work with partners, including the US, to get the right regulatory framework in place.
The UK will escape recession this year, but will continue to lag behind other advanced economies despite new projections of growth. The Organisation for Economic Cooperation and Development has changed its forecast, saying Britain will just about see some growth. It previously forecast 0.2% decline in March. All other G7 countries, apart from Germany, are expected to grow at a faster rate. Meanwhile, the Health Secretary says he wants the NHS to be at the forefront of dispensing new cutting-edge weight loss drugs. The £40 million plot, which can help patients lose 15% of their body weight, aims to tackle obesity, reduce NHS waiting times and get people back to work. Currently, 35,000 people in hospital have access to the drug, but under new government plans, it would be rolled out more widely. Our website has more on many of our stories, gbnews.com. But now it is over to Mark and Bev.
Bev, Very good morning. Thank you for joining us. This is To The Point with Bev Turner and Mark Dolan this morning. Now, our top story, Prince Harry will appear for his second day at the High Court this morning. During day one, the Duke said he experienced hostility from the press from the day that he was born.
Harry accused Mirror Group newspapers of hacking his voicemails when he was a teenager and said he believed stories written in their publications caused security concerns for him and damaged his relationships.
Harry also admitted under oath that his memoir Spare contradicted a claim in his witness statement.
There's a surprise. Can't believe it. Let's speak to our royal correspondent, Cameron Walker, who's down at the High Court this morning. Day two today, Cameron. What are we expecting?
I mean, Mark, yesterday Prince Harry faced nearly 5 hours of questions and cross-examination under oath by a very experienced barrister who is representing Mirror Group newspapers and gave him quite a grilling. Of course, Prince Harry was the first senior member of the royal family to take to the witness box since the 19th century. But I was in the courtroom and he appeared pretty calm, pretty relaxed as he spoke of the effects of the unlawful information gathering, the alleged unlawful information gathering had on him. He spoke of the fact he had a huge amount of paranoia in his relationships during 1996 and 2010, where these articles were first published. He alleged that some journalists had blood on their typing fingers. And in his witness statement, he said the state of British journalism, and controversially, actually, for a member of the royal family, the British government are at rock bottom. Now, Andrew Green, KC, the barrister representing Mirror Group newspapers, asked Prince Harry specifically what distressed him about the articles at the time of publication. And Prince Harry essentially didn't want to be drawn into this idea that he remembers specifically reading these Mirror Group articles at the time of publication. And then the barrister was questioning, well, how can you be distressed if you don't remember reading it at the time? Mr. Green also asked Prince Harry why was he complaining about Mirror Group newspaper articles in particular, when a lot of the information in those articles, he pointed out, were already in the public domain, had already been published by other media organisations in the days or maybe weeks before the article, and indeed on some occasions by either the Press Association or a palace spokesperson as well. Now, the Duke said in response to that, his understanding was that Mirror Group newspaper journalists used unlawful means to move the story forward and to try and get new lines and new exclusives for their publication. What perhaps was quite difficult for Prince Harry was the fact that Mr. Green used his memoir Spare against him on a number of occasions. Perhaps the most difficult one for Harry was an article published in 2003 about an alleged disagreements between Prince Harry and Prince William when it came to whether or not to have a meeting with Diana's former butler, Paul Burrell, because in one version of events in Harry's memoir Spare, it was totally different to what his witness statement said yesterday, and pointing out that controversy, something which Prince Harry did later clarify and said it's all about the hypothetical situations when he had his thoughts in 2003 compared to where he wrote his memoir 20 years later. Now, critics of Prince Harry would say he was way out of his depth. This was not an Oprah interview. This was not a friendly promotional interview for his memoir. He was questioned under oath by a very experienced barrister who is very hot on details. But a media lawyer was saying yesterday, actually, that this is a civil case. It's a much lower threshold to determine whether or not Harry is a victim of unlawful information gathering. And the judge only needs to find on the balance of probabilities, i.e. over 50%, if it is more likely than not that Prince Harry is a victim of unlawful information gathering. So there could be a situation in a couple of weeks' time when the judge gives his ruling that some of the articles of the 33 which are being tested in this case, on balance, is more likely than not Harry is a victim of unlawful information gathering. We'll have to wait and see exactly what the judge says, but Prince Harry is expected pretty shortly to arrive at the High Court in London behind me. He's expected to start giving evidence again, start being cross-examined again at around 10:30 today.
OK, thank you, Cameron. Can I just ask you, Cameron, I think we've still got you. How was his mood? You say he started out quite relaxed. Some of the reports are saying that he became a bit tetchy as the 5 hours went on, was a little bit kind of bristling at some of the things he was being asked to explain. Is that what you saw?
I think definitely towards the end, I think perhaps he was getting slightly impatient or defensive. I think certainly when the barrister, Mr. Green, asked him if he had actually written the witness statement himself and it wasn't the lawyers drafting it for him, he was very adamant that he wrote the witness statement himself. He had been on video calls from Los Angeles for hours and hours with his barrister, with his own barristers going through it, but he very much did write it himself, he says. And he also jokes that he was having a workout by the amount of paperwork he was having to shove around. So it was pretty light-hearted, but I mean, perhaps to be fair to Prince Harry, after nearly 5 hours of being quite heavily grilled and scrutinised, I think perhaps he's getting slightly tired. But I think perhaps we will see him this morning, in theory, being quite fresh-faced and ready to go all over again.
OK, all right, thank you very much, Cameron, thank you.
Interesting. This intellectual genius who got a D in geography at A-level wrote the entire testimony. I think he's woefully out of his depth, and I thought he was very tetchy yesterday based upon those reports. And I like this line from Jan Moir in the Mail today, and her column has got a front-page splash. He located his inner Kevin the teenager, a combustible mix of victimhood and arrogance.
It didn't go well for him. I mean, look, the papers are reporting this. He's taken the papers to court. So they're not going to give a complimentary analysis of the situation, are they?
No.
But nevertheless, it's certainly, he hasn't come out calm, collected. He's not on top of his detail, clearly, in these exchanges. And there's just some absolute golden nuggets where they said to him, what about the story about the gastropub? There was a story about him having his 16th birthday, and the Prince was convinced that the newspaper group had got hold of the story by illegal methods, but Andrew Green, KC, who of course is the Mirror Group lawyer, had said that it was maybe a chef who was working there, and Harry said as a chef he'd be too busy to make that call.
Yes, and of course
it's just naive beyond belief.
His phone was hacked 2 years before he had a phone. That's impressive, isn't it?
It's amazing, isn't it? We're joined in the studio this morning to reflect on this and a little bit else of what's going on today with Tom Harwood is here, and also we've got Richard Tice with us in the studio. What did you make of the assessment of yesterday, Richard?
I've got to be honest, I was quite busy, so I didn't spend hours.
You're like a chef in a pub that can't read a newspaper.
Exactly. But look, how did his legal team not give him more detail, more facts, more information? How did they not brief him to say, you've actually got to come up with some evidence, because this isn't a chat amongst pals.
Yeah.
This is a court of law, and you are seriously under scrutiny by one of the best cases in the land, one of the most forensic. And so he's been caught out, found out. I think there are a couple of areas. I mean, the reality is he only needs to nail the Mirror Group on one thing. And at the moment, it doesn't look like. There are a couple of areas potentially to do with some travel tickets, which hasn't been reported in the newspapers, potentially who knew about his glandular fever. So there's a couple of areas where he might be able to sow some seeds of doubt. But if I was a judge listening to this, I would say, sorry, case not proved.
Tom, if I could, we obviously spent 2.5 hours, you and I, sat at this desk yesterday talking about this, and we had Rafe Haydan-Mankouhi, who's not only a royal expert but also a lawyer. Do you remember the conversation you had with us yesterday about the fact that the newspaper wouldn't reveal their sources?
Yes, of course.
And therefore wouldn't necessarily damage further relationships that Harry had. First day, they threw Chelsea Davies' father under the bus. Didn't they? They said that actually the story that Harry said had come from a newspaper. They said, well, did you know Chelsea Davies' father gave us an interview the day before? And Harry had to say, no, I did not. That was a surprise. What else did you think was surprising?
I think generally I would agree with Richard that this is a case that Harry has brought. It hasn't been brought on him. He has long wanted to take this particular paper group to court. He has a team of very expensive lawyers who've drawn up all of his evidence and all of his claims. And I think the overriding impression from yesterday morning, and right through the afternoon as well, was time and time again, these claims that have clearly been drawn up, gone over, worked on by a team, were able to be relatively easily picked apart in just too many cases. And I wonder, has he been overriding his lawyers? Has he been insisting things took place based on hazy memory and confusion? Or has he just hired the worst people in the world to do his job?
Well, do you think there are echoes of Prince Andrew on Newsnight here? That here's a royal who's used to having people say yes sir, no sir, 3 bags full sir, and it's hubris that's led him to this action, and he's potentially going to get found out now just based upon the detail.
Well, I think there might be a lot in that, and I think it is particularly pertinent that Meghan Markle wants nothing to do with this. She's not come across to the United Kingdom with him. Reportedly, she was trying to warn him away from taking this sort of action and pursuing this sort of vendetta. We were hearing yesterday many reports of Meghan Markle having been advised to want to project a more positive image and to avoid the negative stories. And for Prince Harry, this is raking over lots of negative stories. So perhaps something to learn from this is actually Prince Harry is more of an independent individual than we had perhaps thought.
Just briefly on your political brief, that other bombshell that we mentioned, that the government is at rock bottom. Now, he's entitled to say the media are at rock bottom. He's taking the media to court. But that's a political pronouncement from the son of the King of England, who, by the sounds of it, wants a Labour government. This is potentially very damaging to the monarchy.
Oh, incredibly so. If Prince Harry had not declared himself stepping back from being a senior royal already, this would be his excommunication moment. I mean, it is that seismic. Royals do not do politics, and Harry has just yesterday declared himself a political figure.
You must have been delighted to hear that. Well, as the leader of the Reform Party, did you say, I couldn't agree more, Harry, and we are the solution?
Well, a little bit of that. But actually, in fairness to him, and it's not often we're trying to give him credit, but he has divorced himself from the royal family, so he is in a better place, particularly living overseas, to say this government is at rock bottom.
But once again, it's embarrassing.
The reality is,
it's embarrassing for his father.
It's one of the rare moments where he's telling the truth.
Right.
See, I knew you'd get that in
Listen,
there.
I know you got Anne Widdecombe, but I'm not sure you'll get Prince Harry.
I think we're very happy with Anne Widdecombe. Thank you very much, Mark. But actually, what the judge could say at the end of today, he could say, "Is that it? Really? I mean, have we spent all these millions of pounds? And is that it?" And everyone's going to go, "Yes, my lord." And you just think, what on earth was this all about?
You can't help but think as well that if Harry did have some fantastic smoking gun, that maybe that would have come out on day one.
You would throw that out, absolutely, first off, to sow doubt in everybody's minds, and to get the judge on your side, to get essentially the public on your side, but you're not going to leave it till last.
No, you don't get 2 attempts at a first impression, and the majority of coverage of this will be in today's papers. Tomorrow's papers will definitely cover a lot of it, but there will be other stories as well. There won't be the same amount of coverage, and indeed that ability to make that first impression with that big striding case being put forward, that lessens today.
Do we need to strike a note of sympathy for Harry, though, given the fact that this is a guy who lost his mother when he was a little boy? He had to follow her coffin down the Mall. It was a truly heartrending moment, and he links the media or blames the media potentially or partly for his mother's death. And on a human level, we should understand.
And we mustn't forget that phone hacking did take place. People have been prosecuted. Rogue journalists in this country have been prosecuted for phone hacking. It was something that happened on a not small scale through the late 90s and in the early 2000s. And so whilst it does seem that Harry has sort of gone perhaps a little overboard in his assumption of where all of this was taking place, it's not the most wild conspiracy theory in the world.
Can we just explain as well what the hacking thing is? Because when people hear that, they presume that there's a van with a big aerial sat outside a house.
Yeah, this is answering phone machines where people didn't set up a private code. Now, not many people knew that you had to sort of set up a 4-digit PIN.
Yeah.
And what turned out that journalists could, if they knew the number, they could guess 000, 9999 or 1234 and have access to these messages. It's not sophisticated hacking at all, but it is unscrupulous.
It was found to be unscrupulous. I mean, when I was hacked at the time, I knew it was happening. I got a tip-off from a tabloid journalist who said, Bev, they are checking your voicemails, and so I said, well, they can, because it's my mum in Sainsbury's saying, do you need more nappies? Like, I had nothing to hide, so I had nothing to fear. I feel a little bit differently about it now in terms of our surveillance state that we're living in, I have to say.
Yeah.
But this isn't... I think it's really important when we say hacking. It was generally a lazy journalist on a Friday at 3 o'clock going, I'll just see what's happened to Hugh Grant this weekend.
And I suppose if you are a megastar, if you are someone who is genuinely that level of celebrity, are you not being advised to change your PIN on your answering machine? I mean, perhaps...
That's right. If me, as the nobody, I was advised, do you think somebody might have been advising Prince Harry?
It was incredibly serious. It was a massive breach of privacy. Yeah. And frankly, it was utterly outrageous. And it's good that people went to jail.
It was deeply unethical, wasn't it?
It was the worst of the worst, I think, that any of us can remember. I'm pleased to say, I didn't know the detail that Tom knew, because I've had no idea about this stuff.
But you see, I think doorstepping people is much, much worse. I think a journalist turning up on your doorstep and not... Yeah, because when... So, for instance, when my ex-husband had that awful accident, Olympic medalist James Cracknell, and we got back from hospital, and he wasn't quite himself, and I was dealing with small children and pregnant, and, you know, it was really stressful. And, of course, there's a knock on the door, and I'm changing a nappy upstairs, and I come down, and James is chatting to a journalist on the doorstep, not really understanding what was happening. That, for me, is much worse.
You can say that. You could say that's invasive to an extent. You couldn't say that was duplicitous. And I think that is the difference. Yes. That's the dividing line here.
Yeah,
journalism should be an honest profession.
Hacking is like they've sneaked into your bedroom and hidden in the wardrobe. That's the difference. By the way, speaking of the doorstep, what about Piers Morgan? Because you know, he'll be watching this case very keenly. It could have implications for his reputation, his career, potentially. So far, he's been doorstepped, and I think he's handled it very well. Yesterday, getting into his car, he said, I look forward to reading about Harry's privacy campaign in his next book.
The worldwide privacy tour continues.
It's a moment for Morgan, isn't it, this case?
It is, but from my sort of listening and discussions with him, he's completely relaxed about it. He is absolutely crystal clear. He's got nothing to worry about, nothing to hide, and I don't think they'll lay a glove on him.
Of course, the Leveson inquiry did...
why this is relevant to Piers Morgan, because, of course, he was the editor of the Mirror newspaper at that time.
For a long, long time, from the mid-90s through to the mid-2000s. He was the youngest newspaper editor in the country. But of course, he was questioned in the Leveson inquiry. There was nothing found against him, and he had always maintained that whilst it was clear that there was some phone hacking that took place at the Mirror, he didn't know it went on. That's his position. Whether or not that changes at all, clearly there's more scrutiny on it.
Andy Coulson at The Sun, there was a text, and he texted someone saying, "Do his phone." So three damning words. Why he went to prison. So no smoking gun for Piers Morgan, you think?
I think it's unlikely, considering that the Leveson inquiry did go through that, and that was more rigorous than this is.
And just to let you know, we are waiting for Harry to arrive at the court. We've got the live pictures running at the moment. Huge crowds down there. There are a few protesters with banners. Can't quite see what they're saying at the moment, but obviously a huge amount of attention on the Prince today and for the rest of the day, and of course all this week on GB News. We'll be bringing you all the details of this. What do you expect him to go in there thinking today, Richard Tyson? What will his mindset be? I know I'm asking you to be a clairvoyant here, but if he's had this first day, he's had 5 hours of grilling, it didn't go terribly well, he wasn't across the detail, how does he pick himself up and go into the court today and do a better job?
Frankly, you would hope that he spent most of the night with his legal team actually, you know, coming up with some proper evidence and some hard facts. But I think, given what we've said just earlier, that's pretty unlikely.
Well, this is what was interesting yesterday, Tom, wasn't it? Because Rafe was saying we're not actually officially allowed to do that in this country. He was saying as lawyers, we're not meant to coach. They do it in America, but in this country, lawyers are not meant to coach their... oh, here he is.
Prince Harry acknowledging a few supporters and photographers as he strides in a grey tie, a charcoal suit. Very sober look for the Prince, one of the most famous men in the world, and he's gone in for his day in court, quite literally.
Yes, he has. There we go.
Remarkably quick again, wasn't it?
Yeah.
He
almost
really
ran
did
in.
not want to stay on that pavement for a second longer than he had to.
He's a man who likes his privacy. He wants to keep quiet.
Exactly right.
I mean, he must be delighted with something that has frustrated me perhaps more than usual over the last 24 hours, which is the fact that we're not allowed cameras in these courts.
Ridiculous.
I would love to see his genuine reaction to these questions, his genuine facial expressions. I mean, I know that GB News has employed quite a good impersonator to be performing this. Other channels have done that too. And of course, we've got the sketches. But we're missing out on what would be some excellent transparency.
I think it's a good thing.
We want the evidence, we want the facts. We don't want a theatrical performance. We want the court of law to find the right result, and I think it would be appalling to go down the American route, which ends up just a complete show business charade.
I completely disagree. I think courts have to be open in this country. There's a reason why journalists can go and sit in the courts, why members of the public can go and sit in many courts, and I think that the same sort of showboating perhaps happens and is reported in the press. Isn't it better to have some more unfiltered and direct access to this sort of information? I think that's what an open and democratic society should do.
We've got the best of both worlds. We've got journalists in the court, we've got members of the public, but you haven't got the cameras, you haven't got the show business, and I think that's a good thing.
I agree.
Really? But then it's up to Jan Moir and others to make an interpretation. We've bankrolled this man's life since birth, and I think it's up to the British people to make a judgment about whether he's telling the truth.
We haven't bankrolled his. Actually, that's simply not true. Remember, the Crown Estate is owned by the monarch, and they give all of their profits, except about 15%, to the British taxpayer. So that's simply not the case.
Well, yes, but it's all British property, isn't it? The palaces, the Rolls Royces.
It's
all ours.
Yeah, and they've given it to us. They give the profits, and they keep a small percentage to run their own affairs. Very important distinction.
Are you sort of surprised by quite how deep his pockets are? Well, obviously, he has very deep pockets, Richard Tice, but so the fact that he wants to go through this and spend this much money on legal fees, this will be his own money that he's spending on this court case. This is going to cost him millions.
It will, because if he loses, he'll have to pay all of the costs of the Mirror Group.
Yeah.
And it could be on an exemplary basis if, frankly, the judge concludes, is that it? What a waste of time. And this will be millions and millions of pounds.
You know what that means? That makes him the new Rebecca Vardy.
It will.
There's a thought.
But you know what it will also make him? It will also mean that he will have to go and make more documentaries, more Netflix,
Please,
more
no.
books.
Make it stop.
To fill the coffers. Right, thank you both so much, Richard and Tom, and of course, still to come, Harry, as he becomes the first senior royal to give evidence to the British court for 130 years. We'll have more of that. This is To The Point on GB News, Britain's news channel. First and foremost, I'm a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. Every Sunday from 11. Join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News has its own late-night paper preview show, Headliners, where comedians take you through the next day's top news stories. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper, we've got it covered for you. Headliners, every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
It's 10 a.m. on Wednesday, the 7th of June. You're watching Mark Dolan and Bev Turner on To The Point.
So this morning, obviously big day for Harry. He is in court, day 2 versus the Mirror. We're live at the High Court throughout the programme as the Duke of Sussex is cross-examined over claims of phone hacking.
And he looks just as jolly as ever. Weight loss jabs on the NHS. The government believes a new drug could be a game changer, but is this surrendering into what many see as a lifestyle problem? Get in touch. GB Views at gbnews.com.
And the least racist Western democracy. A new report to mark the Windrush anniversary praises the UK compared to other countries, but a majority of British ethnic minorities still experience racism every day. We're going to be discussing that. And a lot more. Let us know your thoughts on all of our stories this morning. GB Views at gbnews.com. But first of all, here is the news with Aaron Armstrong.
Good morning to you. It is a minute past 10. I'm Aaron Armstrong in the GB newsroom. The Duke of Sussex has arrived at the High Court to give evidence in a second day in his phone hacking claim against the Mirror Group newspapers. Prince Harry is suing MGN for damages, claiming the group hacked his voicemails and that he and other members of his family were victims of unlawful information gathering, which the publisher denies. Harry has accused the former editor of the Mirror, Piers Morgan, of intimidation and a barrage of horrific attacks against him and his wife, Meghan. Proceedings in court due to begin in less than half an hour's time. Now, Pope Francis will have surgery on his abdomen under general anaesthetic this afternoon. The Vatican says his medical team decided the operation was required and confirmed he will stay in hospital for several days to recover. The 86-year-old suffered a number of ailments in recent years. He spent 5 days in hospital back in March with a lung infection and last month skipped audiences because of a fever. The Prime Minister's arrived in Washington ahead of a meeting with the US President that will take place tomorrow. Rishi Sunak today will meet leaders of business and other political figures as he aims to strengthen economic ties. He's expected to reaffirm Western support for Ukraine in his meeting with Joe Biden, in addition to greater regulation of AI and also addressing the growing threat of China. The UN's aid chief says the damaged dam in southern Ukraine will have grave and far-reaching consequences. Thousands of people have been evacuated since the Kakhovka Dam on the Dnipro River was destroyed. Ukraine and Russia blame each other for the explosion. Large parts of the battlefield in the area have been flooded. Media in Moscow are reporting that Russian minefields have been washed away. A state of emergency has been declared in Russian-occupied parts of Kherson. The Health Secretary says he wants the NHS to be at the forefront of dispensing new cutting-edge weight loss drugs. The £40 million pilot aims to tackle obesity, reduce NHS waiting times and get people back to work. Now, the drug, which is only available currently in hospitals, can help patients lose up to 15% of their body weight. Steve Barclay says increased access to the drugs could have a huge impact.
Cancer, diabetes, mental health, MSK. So obesity really is a big impact on the NHS. We think it costs around £6.5 billion to the NHS, but it's about empowering patients. And we know, as I say, that it has a big impact on people's health if they're overweight, but people struggle to lose that weight and to keep that off. And this is a really exciting development, and we want to make sure the NHS is at the front of the queue in rolling it out.
The UK will avoid recession this year, but will continue to lag behind other advanced economies, despite new predictions of growth. The Organisation for Economic Cooperation and Development has changed its forecast, saying Britain will just about see some growth. It previously forecast 0.2% decline in March. All other G7 countries, though, apart from Germany, are expected to grow at faster rates than the UK. Nearly a third of primary schools in England don't have a male teacher. That's a new record low. A new study from the Warwick Business School reports claims boys from poorer backgrounds would benefit from a male teacher in school, but they're less likely to have one. The report says increasing pay and reducing hours could boost recruitment and retention. Baz Ramaya from the Centre for Education and Youth says issues with diversity, though, aren't restricted to gender.
I think the problem of there not being enough male teachers at primary school has been the case for a while, but I think it's also not just about gender. There are also other demographic groups that are underrepresented in teaching, particularly people who are from BAME backgrounds like myself. And if you're teaching in an inner city school and young people there who are frequently from BAME backgrounds themselves only see white people as teachers, then they lack clear aspirational role models. And I think we need to be looking wider than the gender issue.
A man has died competing in the Isle of Man TT motorbike race. Raul Torres Martinez was killed in a crash during the final lap of the Super Twin race. Last year, a father and son were among a number of people to die during the competition. This is GB News. More as it happens, as always. But now it is over to Bev and Mark.
A very good morning, Mark and Bev. On to the point. To our top story, Prince Harry has arrived at the High Court, where he's set to give testimony for the second day of his hearing against the Mirror Group newspapers.
Of course, Harry accused Mirror Group of hacking his voicemails when he was a teenager and said he believed that stories written in their publications caused security concerns for him and damaged his relationships.
Let's speak to our venerated royal correspondent, Cameron Walker, down at the High Court this morning, putting in the hard yards for us. Day two, Cameron, what can we look forward to?
Yes, day two, Mark, as you said, Prince Harry has just arrived in court in the last 15 minutes or so. A very brisk entry into the courtroom, surrounded by photographers and a few protesters, I have to say, as well, who were shouting at him when he went in. One or two, but nonetheless very noisy. Yesterday, he faced nearly 5 hours of questions and cross-examination from a very experienced barrister who is notorious for grilling claimants. Very calm and relaxed before he spoke of the effects of alleged unlawful information gathering and the effects they had on him. He spoke of having a huge amount of paranoia in his relationships, accusing some journalists of having blood on their typing fingers. He also said in his witness statement that the state of British press and indeed the British government, very controversially, as a member of the royal family, was at rock bottom. And that is something that Rishi Sunak would not be drawn on when asked about it by journalists yesterday on his way to Washington. Now, Andrew Green, KC, representing Mirror Group newspapers, he was very hot on the detail and forensically went through line by line with Prince Harry the 20 so far of the 33 articles that are being tested in this case. Now, we asked Prince Harry specifically what distressed him about the Mirror articles at the time of publication, and he asked Prince Harry, does he remember even reading these articles at the time of publication? Prince Harry could not say for sure whether he was. Prince Harry said he didn't want to be drawn on speculation as to whether or not he remembers reading specific articles at the time. The barrister then went on to ask Prince Harry, why is he complaining about these Mirror Group newspaper articles when actually some of the information in it was already in the public domain, either having been previously reported by other publications such as the News of the World or the Mail in the days or weeks before the Mirror article was published, and indeed on some instances official palace spokespeople telling journalists the information. Now, Prince Harry said that from his understanding, Mirror Group newspaper journalists used unlawful means to move the story on, to get some kind of exclusive. The barrister, Mr. Green, also used Prince Harry's memoir Spare against him. One instance, an article dating back to 2003, alleging disagreements between Prince Harry and Prince William over whether or not to meet Diana's former butler, Paul Burrell. Two different versions of the events, one in his witness statement and one in Prince Harry's memoir Spare. And Prince Harry said that he didn't, it was more kind of hypothetical. His opinion might have changed when he was writing the memoir compared to when he actually thought about meeting Paul Burrell 20 years ago. Now, critics are going to say that Prince Harry was very much out of his depth yesterday. He was used to the Oprah interviews or promotional interviews for his memoir Spare. He is not used to grilling from barristers, very experienced barristers. But on the other hand, a media lawyer was saying last night, look, it's on the balance of probabilities here as whether or not Prince Harry wins this case or whether or not he is a victim of alleged unlawful information gathering. And actually, the judge only needs to find on the balance of probabilities, i.e. over 50%, if he is indeed a victim. So there could be a scenario when he gives his ruling in a few weeks' time that on at least some of the 33 articles, on balance, it's more likely than not that Prince Harry is a victim of unlawful information gathering. So Prince Harry's now inside the High Court here in London. He's expected to start being cross-examined again and start giving his evidence at 10:30 a.m. today, so just a few minutes' time, and it's expected to continue into the afternoon.
Okay, thank you, Cameron. Thank you. We will let you get back in there and take all the notes for us and come back and speak to us in a little while. Now,
do we pay Cameron Walker enough to sit through that drivel?
Yes, I'm sure we do. He does it from the love of his heart, don't you, Cameron?
The world's least happy millionaire moaning about his life, blaming the fact that relationships didn't work because of the media. I think the relationship didn't work with that lady, Chelsea Davy, because he's just an annoying numpty.
Well, I kind of said that yesterday on the telly, and a lot of people were quite cross on me on social media saying that was really not very kind. It's just a theory.
You were speaking your truth.
You know, I think that what's interesting, it's funny you should mention Chelsea Davy, because what's occurring to me as we're watching all of this unfold, yet again, he has dragged into the public eye people who have gone away to lead private lives.
Correct.
And what he's doing is complaining about the fact that the press dragged into the public eye people who were leading private lives. And he's doing it again.
Definitely. Well, he dragged the former squaddies that he served with in the military back into the public eye by boasting about killing Taliban, therefore risking their lives.
Yeah.
Well done, Harry. And all these exes, they must be rolling their eyes. I was on a plane with Chelsea Davy a few years ago. What a beauty.
Really?
And yeah, all you can say about those two, Harry and Chelsea, what if?
Well, I think she dodged a bullet, didn't she, really?
No, she probably did.
I don't think this is a marriage.
But he'd still be here, be a serving member of the royal family. Princess Chelsea? Yes,
maybe,
please.
Maybe. Well, let's see what Rafe Haydel-Mancoux thinks, royal broadcaster and historian. Good morning,
Good morning,
Rafe. What did you make of it? I was with you yesterday. We were doing the preamble before he went in. Did it meet your expectations?
Well, it was historic and certainly astonishing, but for all the wrong reasons, I would say. Not least for Prince Harry claiming that his own father's government was at rock bottom, something which is completely without precedent for a member of the royal family.
Can we confirm now that Prince Harry is a lefty? Is that now official?
I think he's so far beyond the left. He's gone off the planet. Well, we've known he's been living in his own planet for quite a while.
It's an interesting concept, aristocratic socialist, isn't it?
Yeah.
Well, I used to know Malcolm Muggeridge's daughter. She said her aunt would send the butler up on May the 1st to raise the red flag over their country house, which I thought was a wonderful thing.
The thing is, I think what we can conclude from all of this is that he doesn't really know what he's talking about.
Correct.
You know, I think he said the government is at rock bottom. If you asked him to give an example of why he felt like that, I don't think he'd be able to give you anything.
Yes, I think so. Well, he's clearly out of his depth here, and we can really see that. I mean, this is a man of limited intellect and capability. It's amazing how ill-prepared he was here. Now, there is a tradition here, it's the law, that you can't coach witnesses who are going into the box, whereas in America you can go through a trial, mock trial, where you can actually iron out all of these problems. But I'm amazed for someone whose life is otherwise perfectly stage-managed, who has a PR team to do everything, that there wasn't actually a team around him who aren't necessarily on this case, but in order to pose these questions to him and go through. If he already has had that and he's still performing like this, I don't know, because I would just have loved to have had Andrew Green sitting next to Oprah Winfrey on that sofa. How wonderful. You know, no one has challenged his truths before.
Yeah.
And as we've seen now, so much of the grievance that he's alleging exists is a product of his own obsessions and his own paranoia. And Andrew Green was able to drive a coach and horses through so many of the arguments that he put forward.
But I think you raise a really interesting point, Rafe, and not just about who's looking after him now, but who was ever looking after his well-being when he was in the royal family, because the naivety that drips off some of his statements around events that were happening and how he felt about them at the time when he was a teenager. He's talked about his father being very hands-off and emotionally distant and unattainable. I think we can all see that's the case.
I don't think we can say that's the case.
Not?
I think this is one of the problems. Is, again, this is his truth coming forward. And so, for example, we've seen in his book that he was never close to his father physically. But of course, we have a lot of footage and a lot of accounts and witnesses saying he was constantly hugging them. You know, even when he was supposedly told about the death of Diana, there was alleged to be a distance between the two of them on the bed. That's not the case at all. And it just goes actually to the key point here, which is what Andrew Green is trying to demonstrate, is what a poor historian Prince Harry is. You cannot believe his accounting of facts or of dates. So, for example, when the Queen Mother died, he alleges that in his book that he was at Eton and was told this by a schoolmaster. In fact, he was on holiday skiing in Switzerland. Now, that's quite a radical difference between fact and reality. And that's why we have to... the problem is he's been allowed to say his truth for so long, and the royal family aren't in a position to challenge it, that we've now actually began to assume it is correct.
But particularly his naivety about the relationship between the royal family and the press. Did nobody sit down with him and explain that that was a symbiotic understanding of mutual benefit? That's what's so interesting. It's like it looks like he's railed against that his entire life. He's never bought into that, has he?
Well, you can understand why. So this was a naturally shy person, and because, you know, losing your mother at such a young age is such a traumatic experience, which forever shapes your upbringing. And so you can totally see why, if he blames the press for that he would have a very negative attitude towards them and be reluctant to. But at the same time, he surely realises he has a duty. You know, with privilege comes responsibility. And it's not that onerous of a task just to allow the press to have a photograph of your child, for example.
It comes back to that idea that he and Meghan want privacy. Paul McCartney was the most famous man in the world when the Beatles broke up, and he lived in a farm. He bought a farm in Scotland, and they barely had a phone line, and he disappeared for 5 years. That's what privacy looks like. Yeah. Okay, literally, the journalists couldn't get to like the Mull of Kintyre or whatever. Harry hasn't done that. He's gone to Hollywood, and of course, he's benefited from the media amplifying the message around his various products and all the rest of it. The issue we've got is he's a professional victim, and professional victims always focus on how they feel, and very often it doesn't stack up with reality.
You're quite right. If you remember, he first of all went to British Columbia, where he was actually in a very remote location, as well as being in one of the realms of the Commonwealth. But it wasn't shortly thereafter, long before he went down to Hollywood, I suppose because of Meghan's encouragement to do that. But of course, why is he playing a victim? Because we're living in a victimhood culture, where victims trump everyone else, and a victim's testimony can never be challenged, can never be questioned. And of course, Hollywood is the hotbed, the madrasa of victimhood. And essentially, he's been given a free pass for so long, and now, unfortunately, he's coming face to face with reality.
I've got to say, my heart bleeds for all of these millionaire victims. It must be so hard.
This is the thing I can't quite square at all. Does he not have... You know what he needs? He needs a really good female friend who's just going to sit him down and go, Harry, mate. But I think by
Princess
all accounts... I would have thought Zara and Mike Tyndall would all...
Not a bad shout.
But
well, he's close
by
to,
all accounts,
he's close to the two York princesses
everybody.
too. He's still close to the York princesses.
But did they get it as well? Doesn't he need somebody a bit outside to maybe give that perspective? Maybe Eugenie and Beatrice both feel a bit also hard done by. They seem to carry themselves pretty well, actually. Remarkable, given their parents, isn't it? That they actually have come out... They seem to do a pretty good job. She had a baby this week as well, didn't she? We barely touched upon that. We had a new royal baby this week.
That's right.
Didn't we, Ray?
Named after all four grandparents, which is interesting.
Yeah. Right, anyway, I think we're moving on. Don't forget, you can watch all the coverage of Prince Harry's time in the High Court live on GB News all this week.
That's right, we've got ringside seats. Still to come, flood levels in southern Ukraine are expected to reach peak levels. Very worrying. We'll tell you why next. This is To The Point on GB News, Britain's news channel.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, Nana, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment.
I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better.
Crop failures, famine, war, suffering on a scale completely unimaginable.
We are putting the cart before the horse. As Charles I said at the scaffold, he was the true defender of liberty.
Yeah, I've completely derailed the conversation.
Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Co, we tackle the issues of the day with real, robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is two new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates. Do you not believe in prisons?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed. So I guess they've always been quite woke. That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat. Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now? Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
As the crow flies, it's 23 minutes past 10. You're watching To The Point on GB News with Bev Turner and Mark Dolan, in for Andrew Pearce.
Now, the UK is a better place to live as a minority than any other major Western democracy, such as the USA, Germany or France, says a major new study.
However, the Windrush report also found that 2/3 of ethnic minority respondents still face discrimination as part of their everyday lives in Britain.
So let's speak now to the director of anti-racism group Don't Divide Us, Alka Sehgal-Cuthbert. Good morning, Alka. Thank you for joining us. Just, if you wouldn't mind, just give us the outline of this report and what the conclusions that are drawn from it.
OK, well, I think overall it's a really positive story. I think it confirms a kind of common sense view that most people have, that Britain has made great progress and that generally Britain is a kind of society that allows for a lot of, social mixing between races, and that we see that in our everyday lives. So it's great, to find 80% of ethnic minority respondents, British ethnic minority respondents, agree with that opinion. It's interesting, I think, that it's actually a larger number than the white British respondents. Now, the report also finds that at the same time, people are significant. I think it's 67% of ethnic minorities say that they face everyday discrimination. And that is a problem, but it also tells you, I think we can take a positive angle on this, because it tells you that people are really quite sophisticated in their understanding. They can hold the idea that it's possible to have, individual incidents of racism and discrimination without therefore leaping to the generalisation that everything is systematically or structurally racist. They understand, because otherwise you wouldn't have them at the same time saying Britain was a great place to be, generally a positive view. So the two, the positive and the positive overview and the recognition of discrete, individual instances of racism, I think don't contradict each other. What they show is that the British generally, the respondents, and I think the British public generally, have quite a nuanced and complex view on race relations, and a tolerant one.
Well, looking at whether Britain's made significant progress on race over the last 25 years, the report concluded that 68% of ethnic minority respondents and more, 71% of white people, said that it had made significant progress over the last 25 years. In some ways, those numbers seem quite small. You would think that maybe, the majority of people would think that we have become a safer, more welcoming place to live in the last 25 years, Alka.
Well, I think, the majority do show that. I don't think we should forget that. That is what the report is showing. I think, as to why it isn't higher, which I think is your question, I've no definite answer. I can speculate, and I think something may be to do with the more recent overlay of a much more politicised, highly kind of reductive and anti-majority version of racism and anti-racism that's been covered. It is influential in our institutions. Both our last report and our forthcoming report shows how it is actually quite a prevalent view in our institutions, and that is, in a way, I think, it may be causing confusion. You've only got to think 2 years ago, Cambridge University was trying to say raising an eyebrow was an example of racism. That's how confused the debate is in some circles. So when you've got an expanded definition of racism that includes everything and everything, and you've got a kind of quite authoritarian, anti-tolerant narrative around race, then I think that might be why some people are maybe hesitant or to voice their opinions or to, to say what they really think, which is probably that, yeah, Britain's okay. It's doing well.
Alka, briefly, if you can, you're part of Don't Divide Us, which is a brilliant group. The clue's in the title. It's a group that identifies there is everyday racism, which is truly appalling, but it's not leveraged to political ends. And we know, don't we, that when the Sewell report came out, I think it was a couple of years ago now, the Commission on Race and Ethnic Disparities, it confirmed or it reported that Britain is not structurally racist. And there are many who do have a political axe to grind who were furious about that report. This latest report will not be welcome to some who seek to continue to divide.
I think that's true. They will, already they are, you can find the kind of headline spins on this. You found it in even the, for example, Wendy Williams' recommendations, 27 of which have been recommended. So only 3 out of the 30 overall have been rejected. And yet certain headlines from certain media quarters were trying to spin that as a narrative of the government rejects all Windrush recommendations. The government does a U-turn. And I think and I think we will see this year will be an emphasis on there's still great progress to be made. We still face all this discrimination. In a way, the problem with that is that it's just so pickled. It's like historically pickled. It's a view of what was happening in Britain maybe 30, 40 years ago. It doesn't take account of the fact that many even of the Windrush generation have integrated successfully and done well and been successful citizens. It doesn't take account of the fact that today the majority of immigration isn't from the Caribbean. It's from Africa. It's from Somalia. It's from Albania. So the whole question of immigration and of racism, which are kind of two separate things, it needs a much more open-minded approach and a discussion. And I think just reverting back to an old model of...
Thank you so much. I'm sorry to cut you off. It's a huge topic, but we are short on time. That was Alka Segal-Cuthbert from Don't Divide Us.
The lefties will hate that report.
Yes, they will.
The woke mob will be furious.
Well, it just shows that, we get accused of racism in this country a lot, and we are, as we've been proven, very, very welcoming.
Lord Sewell authored a report which was... He's a black man, black British man, and it was a very diverse organisation that sort of looked at it. Found Britain wasn't structurally racist. He lost his honorary doctorate at a university. People were so angry.
Yeah. Right. Russia is escalating its attacks on Ukraine. The UN's aid chief has warned that the damaged dam at the Dnipro River will have grave and far-reaching consequences.
Large parts of the battlefield in the area have been flooded, with Ukraine and Russia blaming each other for the explosion.
Joining us now is GBNews' Home and Security Editor Mark White. Hi, Mark. Good to see you. We broke this news yesterday. How bad has the situation got now?
What we are seeing is a slowly evolving catastrophe now in the Dnipro Valley, just south of this dam. As you would expect, with a massive dam breach like this and all of the waters that are behind that dam, the structural engineers are estimating that over the coming days, things are likely to deteriorate further with the remaining dam structure likely to give way, or at least part of it to give way, and even more water will cascade down into the Dnipro Valley.
Easy question for you. Who blew it up, Russia or Ukraine?
Well, it's an interesting one. Clearly, Ukraine is pointing the finger squarely at Russia, saying it was a mine from within the dam itself. And when you look at the CCTV pictures from the side of the dam, it's certainly a massive blast. Russia is saying no, this was shelling or a missile strike that's come from Ukraine. Interestingly, both the US and the UK government say they are still assessing the intelligence around this. They haven't come to a firm conclusion. They are erring on the side of it being Russia, but they haven't definitively said that as yet. But clearly, those questions, I say they're for another day, they are pertinent questions. Of course, if this was a deliberate act, as it clearly was from one side or the other, it's horrific. But what is the most immediate concern is the flooding of some 80 settlements that are immediately in the flood path of all this water that's cascading down. And it's, as I say, it's a slow-moving tragedy. It's filling up. Overnight, there have been images that have come out of people who have, as we see in flooding situations around the world, when their houses start to flood, they move up to the roof, and they're on the roof desperately seeking help. And there are boats and things like that going out. It's not a lot of air power in terms of helicopters. They can't really fly in a war zone safely to go and pluck people from rooftops. So if they can reach them by a boat, that's what they're doing. Horrific stories coming through, like the local zoo in the Ukrainian-held city of Kherson has been inundated, and I think most of the animals within the zoo have drowned. We've seen heart-wrenching pictures as well of people out there, not just rescuing the elderly and vulnerable, but lots of pets and alike from towns all around.
Hideous, hideous. Thank you, Mark.
It's awful.
Thanks. Now, still to come this morning, Oxfam has denied cruelly satirising J.K. Rowling. We'll tell you what that's all about after your morning's news with Aaron.
Hi there, it is 10:34. I'm Aaron Armstrong in the GB newsroom. The Duke of Sussex is in the High Court for a second day of cross-examination in his phone hacking case against Mirror Group newspapers. He and his lawyers have selected 33 articles from MGN Publications in which they believe unlawful techniques were used to get the story. The publisher denies wrongdoing. The Prince must bring facts or overwhelming evidence to prove his case. The Prime Minister's arrived in Washington ahead of a meeting with the US President tomorrow. He's expected to reaffirm Western support for Ukraine with Joe Biden, address the growing threat of China and the need for greater regulation of AI. The Health Secretary, Steve Barclay, says it's necessary to manage the risks.
I was up at Blackpool Victoria Hospital where they're using AI to pick up cancers that wouldn't be visible to the human eye. Extra 20% detection rate on those that were too small for people to see. But alongside there are risks as well to AI. So it's important we don't let those risks crowd out the opportunities. We need to look at this internationally, to work with partners, including the US, to get the right regulatory framework in place.
Pope Francis will have surgery on his abdomen under general anaesthetic this afternoon. The Vatican says his medical team decided the operation was required because of a hernia. He will be in hospital for several days to recover. The 86-year-old suffered a number of ailments recently, spending 5 days in hospital in March with a lung infection, and last month he skipped audiences because of a fever. And more on our stories on our website, gbnews.com.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for gold and silver investment.
And a quick look at the markets today. The pound will buy you $1.2438 and 1.1633 euros. The price of gold, £1,577.85 per ounce. And the FTSE 100 is at 7,626 points.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News, investments that matter.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. Every Sunday from 11. Join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News has its own late-night paper preview show, Headliners, where comedians take you through the next day's top news stories. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper, we've got it covered for you. Headliners, every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Deebs & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage. Here on GB News, we will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
Good morning, this is To The Point. Thank you for joining me and Mark Dolan this morning. You've been getting in touch with your views. Paul has said about Harry, it's ironic that Harry doesn't want the attention, but he's getting more attention now than he ever did before.
That's a brilliant point. How about David? Although not a working royal, Harry is still 5th in line to the throne. Surely this must be changed as soon as possible in view of his political statement. Well said, David.
And John, who is drowning in the milk of human kindness this morning, says, personally, I have sympathy for Prince Harry. In my view, the man needs people around him to help him and guide him, and he doesn't have that. Yeah.
Charlotte gets the last word. Charlotte, thank you for your email. Harry has done himself no favours, and you wonder what he's going to come out with next, which I'm sure makes the senior royals quake in their shoes every time he appears in the media.
Yeah, absolutely. Right, we're pleased now to be joined by former Lib Dem Minister Norman Baker and the Director of the Common Sense Society, UK, Emma Webb. Good to see you both. Right, let's start with some... The papers are full of interesting, brilliant and diverse stories this morning, so I want to get through as many as possible. Big story, of course. Rishi Sunak is going to America to meet Joe Biden. What are our expectations for this meeting, Emma? What would be a good outcome for him and the UK?
Well, that is a difficult question to answer. I mean, I think what we would all like to see is a sort of revival of the special relationship. But I think many of us are starting to wonder now whether that special relationship may have been a slightly anachronistic myth. I think so much hangs on what is going to happen in the next election in the States. I think Rishi has shown himself perhaps to not be quite as hawkish as many of us would like on foreign policy issues, on things to do with net zero. So I think that there are a whole ton of different things that we could expect them to be discussing. But I think fundamentally the most important thing here is to try and seal that relationship, because geopolitically, we've got hostile threats from China, from Russia. As I say, Rishi's quite soft on China. But I think that is something that is fundamentally important, that we're seeing the kind of waning of American power geopolitically. Yeah. And that's something that really needs to be shored up.
Do you agree, Norman?
Well, I mean, this is the fourth time, I think, that Rishi Sunak will have met Joe Biden, and Downing Street's very keen to play that up and show how there is a, quote, special relationship. This last special relationship, I think, was actually Margaret Thatcher and Ronald Reagan. It's a bit of a myth, and certainly the British use the phrase far more than the Americans do. I think there is a good cooperation, which may be special, on defence and to some extent on foreign affairs, and certainly the two have been reasonably in tandem on Ukraine, which is very important. I don't actually agree that the US power is waning. I think Biden is making an effort to get into Asia a bit more than the Americans had been, which is a good thing because I share the concern about China. What won't happen in the US is any sort of trade deal because the terms of any trade deal are just anathema to Britain, I think, in terms of some of the what I would call polluted American food.
Yeah.
And certainly, as far as the US is concerned, there's no way they'll get that through Congress. Of course, Biden is not a pro-British Prime Minister. I mean, he's very interested in his Irish heritage and regards what's happened in Northern Ireland as the British government endangering the peace process. That's how he sees it. But then we didn't really have very much from Obama because Obama has his Kenyan roots and he regarded Britain as a kind of colonial power. So the last time we had an American president and a US president and a British Prime Minister in tandem was probably Blair and Clinton, as a matter of fact.
Yeah, I mean, Donald Trump had his flaws, but he was an Anglophile. He was a friend of this country. Joe Biden, not so much.
No, that's perfectly true. Trump did very keen on the Queen, as he notably said. He did actually run up a £60,000 bill, I noticed yesterday, for Police Scotland from being who were dealing with his visit to his golf course, which I think personally should have coughed up the bill himself. I mean, Prince Harry is arguing, is he not, that he ought to be able to buy police protection. Well, here's Trump getting it for nothing.
Rishi Sunak has released this extraordinary photograph. I was just looking for it in the papers this morning. I can see it there in your copy of The Sun,
yes.
Norman. Of Rishi Sunak sat on an aeroplane. I don't know whether we've got this image. Surrounded by journalists, with Rishi sat there with his cup of tea.
Yes.
And it's a very odd image to release. What are they trying to achieve, Emma, with this picture?
I haven't seen this.
It's the West Wing, isn't it? Or is it the thick of it?
It's like, do you know what it is? It's on an air. It's that idea. He's on his aeroplane, and he's sat there with his cup of tea, and all of the journalists are sort of leaning over like that with their pens, as if they're on the edge, hanging on his every word. It's a very odd image, and he's looking down the camera, and they're all looking.
I think it makes him look very presidential.
That's
matey. What they're going for.
He's being matey, isn't he? He's saying, "I'm one of you lads." Gather round.
Yeah, it has a bit of the whiff of David Cameron about it, sort of rolling the sleeves
But
up.
I've got to say, I feel sorry for him. It's a long-haul flight, right? And it looks like he's been sat next to Beth Rigby for 8 hours. And I wouldn't wish that on anyone.
He's turned down the first pitch at a baseball game, which is probably very wise. And he was going to have to go sit through a baseball game, which is, in my view, terribly dull. He ought to meet the American president sit through a cricket match.
Can you imagine anything worse, though, Emma, than being on the international, the global stage as the Prime Minister and having to pitch a ball in a baseball stadium in front of all that crowd?
There's almost more at stake there than trying to eat a bacon sandwich.
Yeah.
It's exactly that, isn't it? I know.
Sunak drops the ball.
I can see why they said no.
Water balls up.
Yeah, exactly. The headlines write themselves.
Yeah.
Right, let's talk about this interesting J.K. Rowling being in the crosshairs of Oxfam, Emma. What's happened here? We do have the photograph of this, I believe. This is an Oxfam awareness campaign.
Well, this is, I mean, it's unbelievably awful, I think, is the first thing to say, the most important thing to say. So this was taken from a photograph. It looks as if it was modelled on a photograph of J.K. Rowling, and the turf badge there replaced the poppy in the original image. And there's also been some speculation about whether that, frankly, racist-looking depiction on over her shoulder may be based on a good friend of mine, Andy No, who's a journalist who's known for calling out Antifa far-left radical activists, and they're also therefore accused of being a transphobe. So this is an unbelievable use of the donations that people very generously give to Oxfam. And if you remember, it's actually not that long since they put out this language guidance document telling their staff not to use terms that are not inclusive.
Including mother.
Like mother and father, instead referring to parents. So they have taken this down. They have issued a sort of apology for it.
But obviously this has gotten past the leadership of Oxfam. There's no way it would be put out otherwise. Somebody who's very politically motivated has obviously created this cartoon. Nobody at any point has seen any problem with it. And it's been put out during Pride Month as well, which is I think, particularly stinging for a lot of people who are same-sex attracted.
Yeah.
Because, of course, not only is the trans movement drenched in misogyny, but it's also causing problems for those who are same-sex attracted because, of course, the denial of biological sex has implications for people who are homosexual as well. So to do this during Pride Week, I think some people find particularly hurtful.
Well, yeah,
and to add that Andy Ngo, who this may or may not be based on, it is speculation, is also himself a gay man.
I don't think most people have got a problem with somebody saying, look, I was Steve, can you call me Sheila and I'll wear a frock, and good luck to you, right? It's a free country. But I think what people might not realise and why this is such an important issue is that this ideology supports the principle that somebody who's an intact biological male, calls himself female, going into a women's toilet, a women-only changing room, entering women's sports. That's the ideology that underpins all of this.
And that, Norman, is what Oxfam have wrongly presumed. Everybody just buys into the idea that is like the opposite of what you were just describing is okay, isn't it?
Yeah, well,
they must exist in an echo chamber.
Well, Oxfam's about famine relief. That's what they're supposed to be doing, and I think this is a diversion for them. I'm interested in the freedom of speech angle as a liberal, and I think people should be free to say what they want, and the answer to people not liking it is to stand and say something against them. That's the way it should work. I'm not in favour of people being shut up, and I don't like the fact that J.K. Rowling, whether you agree with her or not, it doesn't matter. I don't like the fact that she's become a hate figure among a minority of people in the country. That's just not right, and it's not fair. She's expressing a view, which by and large I happen to agree with, by the way. But I mean, why shouldn't she express a view?
Also, do you know what irritates me? Is the idea that J.K. Rowling is judged on her opinions, or you mentioned the word view. I don't think it's an opinion to say that there is a difference between a biological male and a biological female. That's not an opinion. That's not a controversial angle. That's biology. That's what I learned at school.
Yeah, completely. It's just a biological fact, isn't it? And I think that given that Oxfam is supposed to be, people are giving them money, you say go woke, go broke. It's one thing for companies, but you're talking about a charity here. You're talking about all of those people that Oxfam is supposed to be helping, that people are donating probably millions of pounds. I have no idea what their annual donations are, but the people are really very generous towards Oxfam. And what they're doing here is demonising somebody who's standing up for women's rights, for women's same-sex spaces, for the right to women to go to a women's-only refuge, for example.
And the fact that they've used the word TERF on the badge, just explain to people what a TERF is, because some people watching this will have no idea what that means.
So it means trans-exclusionary radical feminist, and it's used as a sort of derisive term to refer to women essentially who are standing up for sex-based rights, or just, as you'd say, for biological fact, the fact that there are women and there are men, and that it's not possible for you to actually change your sex. It's a fact. It's just not possible to do that. And there are many women who are particularly concerned, either women who are themselves lesbians and they're same-sex attracted. They don't want to be sort of told that they're being transphobic if they don't fancy somebody who is a biological male but identifies as a female. And then there are many women who are concerned, J.K. Rowling is one of them, that women are having their rights diminished by this movement that is undermining the very, very philosophical foundations of sex-based rights. So this is used as a derisive term, and you sometimes see people holding placards saying things like, I'm not going to say it because it's a breakfast show, but saying things that are violent towards people who are identified as TERFs by protesters, and as we saw recently with Posey Parker when she was abroad, actually being physically threatened by people. And you can just see from this cartoon, it's trying to kind of inspire visceral feelings of hatred. I mean, look at the way that they are caricaturing
the classic
these evil characters sort of leaning over you and dominating you and frightening and scary, when actually these are people who are, again, during Pride Week, they think they're being all-inclusive.
It's horrible. It's unkind. It's just hateful, isn't it?
Do you think it will hurt Oxfam? Do you think our viewers and listeners will stop going to their local charity shop?
Yeah,
I think it may well do. Can I just say that the invasion of personal space, of women's space, concerns me, and it concerns me for one particular reason, from my experience, which was when I was a Home Office minister. I went round to a women's refuge, of course, which is full of simply women. I was probably the first man allowed in and felt actually I was also intrusive in that particular environment. But I know how important it was for the women there who've been subject to abuse and attacks and physical assault to have a safe space. And the idea it might be invaded by someone who wasn't a woman, in their view, seems to me to be to take away the little protection which they have.
Yeah. I want to quickly touch upon Norman. Boris Johnson would keep his seat if there were an election.
Well, this is a poll carried out by forgotten his name now, Lord Ashcroft, who says that in the poll he carried out, the previous Prime Minister would retain 50% of the vote if there were a by-election. Now, we don't know whether that's true or not, because by-elections can change opinion in the public within a couple of weeks. I mean, I've seen this myself in by-elections when what looks likely to happen 3 weeks out turns out to be entirely different on election day. So we don't know that. What we do know is that he may well face a sanction from the House of Commons, which is a ban of more than 10 days or more. And if that's the case, a recall petition can be started. It only requires a minority of the population in the seat to do that, and there's probably a minority of the population who don't want him there. So if that were the case, it would probably be started. The SNP MP, Margaret Ferrier, has been suspended for 30 days for breaching COVID rules.
What a hero. I love that woman.
I do.
I might get a tattoo that says Margaret forever. I'd give her a damehood, actually.
Well, whether you give her one or not, the fact is she's been suspended for 30 days for breaching COVID rules. And of course, the Prime Minister breached COVID rules in number 10.
I love Margaret Ferrier. Blowing her a kiss. What a hero.
It's ridiculous now that we're talking about Margaret Ferrier all this time along. Anyway, we've got more to talk about. There's so many stories. We didn't even get to them. We will do it.
Definitely. In the next few moments, we'll bring you up to speed with the latest from the High Court, where Prince Harry is testifying. This is GB News.
Coming up, brace yourself for day 2 of Harry's High Court testimony as we continue our exclusive coverage of his assault on the British Free Press. Expect more bombshells like this using our Harry.
The phrase two-faced may have come from a voicemail. That's how I've always seen him. I've never smoked a joint in that pub or in my father's house.
So join me, Samantha Markle, Lady Colin Campbell and Jim Davidson for Harry's Evidence, The Verdict, Day 2, coming up on Dan Wootton tonight, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m, only on GB News.
I'm Alex Deakin. This is your latest weather update from the Met Office for GB News. More of the same today, but there are signs of a change on the horizon. For today, though, it's a fine and sunny one for the vast majority. Again, the eastern side of the country likely to stay fairly cloudy. Grass pollen and UV levels very high in some locations, and the pressure is high. This high pressure has been giving us the fine weather for quite some time now, but still bringing in the cloud overnight, and it's been another drab start to the day. That cloud is slowly breaking up, but parts of the east coast are going to stay pretty grey again. Northern Scotland also staying fairly cloudy, but through the central belt and most other areas, if it isn't already sunny, it will turn sunny, and temperatures responding to that sunshine getting over 20 Celsius, whereas again on that east coast, particularly with a nagging wind across East Anglia, temperatures really struggling in the low teens. Through this evening, again, most places fine and pleasantly warm, but then the cloud just spills back in once more overnight. A repeat scenario where it stays clearest in the west, temperatures again dropping down to single figures. Most places start Thursday at 8 to 10 Celsius. Most will start dry, but the cloud could be thick enough over the East Midlands, parts of eastern England for a little bit of drizzle here and there for a time in the morning. That should peter out. And again, the cloud will break up. A sunny start for West Wales, southwest England and elsewhere. Many places seeing that cloud breaking up. But again, parts of the east may stay fairly glum. Perhaps a bit brighter across parts of East Anglia, with temperatures maybe a smidge higher. But again, coolest in the east, warmest in the west, temperatures getting into the low 20s, 23, 24, maybe a 25 Celsius in South Wales. But signs of a change as the sunshine turns increasingly hazy with high clouds spilling in from the southwest. And yes, that is some rain, just not far away from the southwest. It's going to push northwards, heavy thundery showers during the weekend, but as well as an increasing risk of some heavy showers, it's going to be turning hotter and more humid.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, "Nah, stop arguing." I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment.
I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better.
Crop failures, famine, war, suffering on a scale completely unimaginable.
We are putting the cart before the horse. As Charles I said at the scaffold, he was the true defender of liberty.
Yeah, I've completely derailed the conversation.
Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes & Co, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views, and often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is two new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates. Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat. Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
It is 11 o'clock on Wednesday, the 7th of June. This is To The Point on GB News with Beth Turner and Mark Dolan.
Now, day 2 of Harry versus the Mirror. The cross-examination is underway. First up, an article about the Prince's knee injury whilst he was at Sandhurst. We'll bring you all the latest details.
I am sure that is more interesting than that sounded. Weight loss jabs on the NHS.
Party knee!
The government believes that a new drug could be a game changer, but is this surrendering into what we see as many see as a lifestyle problem?
And the least racist Western democracy. A new report to mark the Windrush anniversary praises the UK compared to other countries, but a majority of British ethnic minorities still experience everyday racism.
I am dying to know about Harry's hurty knee at school and why he's concerned about the fact that made it into the paper. Oh, Harry is the gift that keeps on giving, isn't he? Right, gbviews@gbnews.uk is the email address. But first of all, the latest headline with Aaron.
Good morning to you. It's 11:minutes. Aaron Armstrong here in the GB newsroom. The Duke of Sussex is in the High Court right now giving further evidence in his phone hacking claim against Mirror Group newspapers. Prince Harry suing MGN for damages, claiming the group hacked his voicemails and he and other members of his family were victims of unlawful information gathering, claims the publisher denies. Harry has accused the former editor of the Mirror, Piers Morgan, of intimidation and a barrage of horrific attacks against him and his wife, Meghan. Pope Francis will have surgery on his abdomen under general anaesthetic this afternoon. The Vatican says his medical team decided the operation was required because of a hernia, and they've confirmed he'll be in hospital for several days. The 86-year-old has suffered a number of ailments in recent years. He spent 5 days in hospital in March with a lung infection and skipped audiences last month because of a fever. The Prime Minister's arrived in Washington ahead of his fourth meeting with the US President. That will take place tomorrow. Rishi Sunak is expected to reaffirm Western support for Ukraine with Joe Biden, in addition to addressing the growing threat of China, climate change and artificial intelligence. The Health Secretary, Steve Barclay, says regulation would mitigate the risk while protecting the benefit of AI. The UN's aid chief says the damaged dam in southern Ukraine will have grave and far-reaching consequences. Ukraine and Russia accuse each other of deliberately destroying the Nova Kakhovka dam in an act of wartime sabotage. Floodwaters in southern Ukraine are expected to crest later today. Tens of thousands of civilians have been fleeing. Large parts of the battlefield in that area have been flooded. Media in Moscow have reported Russian minefields have been washed away and a state of emergency has been declared in what is the Russian-occupied area of Kherson. Now, the Health Secretary says he wants the NHS to be at the forefront of dispensing new cutting-edge weight loss drugs. The £40 million pilot aims to tackle obesity, reduce NHS waiting times and get people back to work. The drugs, which are only available in hospitals at the moment, can help patients lose up to 15% of their body weight. Steve Barclay says increased access to the drugs could have a huge impact.
Cancer, diabetes, mental health, MSK. So obesity really is a big impact on the NHS. We think it costs around £6.5 billion to the NHS, but it's about empowering patients. And we know, as I say, that it has a big impact on people's health if they're overweight, but people struggle to lose that weight and to keep that off. And this is a really exciting development, and we want to make sure the NHS is at the front of the queue in rolling it out.
The UK will avoid a recession, but will continue to lag behind other advanced economies this year, despite new growth predictions. The Organisation for Economic and Cooperation and Development has changed its forecast, saying Britain will just about see some growth. It previously forecast a 0.2% decline back in March. All other G7 countries, though, apart from Germany, are expected to grow at a faster rate. The Metropolitan Police say the force will apologise to anyone wrongly arrested during the King's coronation. Officers have been accused of being heavy-handed during the event, which led to 62 arrests. 6 members of the anti-monarchy group Republic were held for 16 hours before being released without charge, while volunteers for Westminster Council safety scheme were detained in the early hours of the morning and released later on the next afternoon. Nearly a third of primary schools in England don't have a male teacher. That's a new record low. A new study from the Warwick Business School claims boys from poorer backgrounds would benefit from a male teacher in school, but they're less likely to have one. The report says increasing pay and reducing hours could boost recruitment and retention. Baz Ramia from the Centre for Education and Youth says issues with diversity, though, are not restricted to gender.
I think the problem of there not being enough male teachers at primary school has been the case for a while, but I think it's also not just about gender. There are also other demographic groups that are underrepresented in teaching, particularly people who are from BAME backgrounds like myself. And if you're teaching in an inner city school and young people there who are frequently from BAME backgrounds themselves only see white people as teachers, then they lack clear aspirational role models. And I think we need to be looking wider than the gender issue.
And a Spanish motorcycle rider has died competing in the Isle of Man TT race. Raul Torres Martinez was killed in a crash during the final lap of the Super Twin race last night. Last year, a father and son were among 6 people to die during the competition. Torres Martinez is the 267th fatality in the history of the event. And that is it for the moment. We'll bring you more as it happens here on GB News, but now it's back to Mark and Bev.
So, Prince Harry has taken his seat in the witness box to resume giving evidence in his civil case against the Mirror Group newspapers.
Harry accused the Mirror Group of hacking his voicemails when he was a teenager and said he believed stories written in their publications caused security concerns for him and damaged his relationships. Let's speak to our royal correspondent Cameron Walker, who's down at the High Court this morning. Cameron, any developments?
Yeah, well, Prince Harry has resumed giving evidence, and actually, as the courtroom became back in session, Andrew Green, KC, representing Mirror Group newspapers, launched straight in with a question about article number 22 of 33 that are being tested in this case, to which Prince Harry interrupted and said, "Good morning," trying to perhaps be slightly pleasant, which got a bit of a laughter in the courtroom for Andrew Green being quite so keen to start examining him. But nonetheless, he resumed his cross-examination of the Duke, asking him about an article published in 2005 by the Sunday People about him having a knee injury at Sandhurst, and fellow cadets at Sandhurst complaining that he was given preferential treatment before being let off grueling marches. Now, Mr. Green asked Harry why he had chosen to add this article to his case at a later stage. The Duke replied he referred his question to his legal team instead. Mr. Green then asked about a press release issued before this article was published by Clarence House, that's the former Prince Charles's private office, about the injury, which also included a quote from Prince Harry. So the barrister asked the Duke if he stood by the evidence in his witness statement that, and I quote, "I don't going around discussing any medical issues or injuries." Now, Prince Harry responded to that by saying, "Yes, it's entirely accurate, my witness statement. That is the reference to while I was at Sandhurst and the distrust I ended up having with the medical staff at Sandhurst." Now, Mr. Green then turned to another article. So we're on article number 23 right now. Article 22. He referred to an article in The Independent, apologies, on the same day as the People article was published, which is article number 22, and asked the Duke if he accepted that there was a degree in public interest in the story about his knee injury. Prince Harry says, "No, I do not accept there was public interest in that story." Mr. Green then referred to Prince Harry's answer yesterday about the public interest of him taking illegal substances. Prince Harry responded yesterday saying, "Public interest or in the interests of the public?" Mr. Green then asked Harry, "In your view, what does constitute an article being written in the public interest about you?" Prince Harry said, "A life-threatening injury." And I'm sure there are others. Well, the case continues in the High Court. Prince Harry is still being cross-examined by Mr. Andrew Green, KC, representing Mirror Group newspapers. He's expected to continue giving evidence into the afternoon.
Thank you, Cameron. Cameron Walker there, down at the High Court. We are joined back in the studio by Rafe Haydel-Mancu. What do you make of that particular?
Well, I find that fascinating to think that, that Prince Harry doesn't think, for example, the taking of drugs or an injury is not in the public interest. When you are a member of the royal family, or if you're a senior prime minister or so forth, those things are in the public interest. They need to, especially when they're being funded by the taxpayer. And you'll remember, for example, it was recently alleged in the Daily Mail and elsewhere, it was claimed that Prince Harry had been excused whenever there were military drug testers coming around, that he conveniently had to leave base and go to Buckingham Palace on urgent business. Now, quite what urgent business you would need to go on as a young prince, conveniently at the same time that there were drug tests going on. That surely is in the public interest. But according to his account, that's not in the public interest. And I think it just goes to show how removed he is from reality and how his perception of what is right and wrong or what is appropriate differs largely from the mainstream. Now, it should be said here, I mean, Andrew Green's doing a superb job. He's slicing through all of these arguments with a sort of a surgical skill and revealing there isn't much meat on the bones of many of his arguments. But here, if I can put my lawyer's hat back on again, the threshold here is quite low. It's on the balance of probabilities that the judge has to decide whether or not Harry has had his privacy intruded through unlawful means. But not only that, only one of the 33 articles needs to have that proof demonstrated. So even though we're seeing a lot of articles here being dismissed by Andrew Green, 32 of them can go by the wayside, but if one of them actually stands up to that test, then Prince Harry will have a victory. We should also point out, of course, that everything we've seen today and yesterday is very one-sided, because it's, of course, the defence's attack on Prince Harry. From this afternoon, we're going to have the other side. We're going to have David Sherborne, the barrister for Prince Harry's side, barrister to the stars, Orange Sherbet, as he's called because of his permatan, but he's actually going to be going after one of the Mirror Group journalists, and then you will see the sparks fly, and we're going to have a whole array of convincing arguments made by the other side, which will give us, I think, some necessary balance.
Yeah, I mean, look, he's lashed out, hasn't he, after a day and a bit in court. He called the media and the government rock bottom, which is unprecedented, particularly the reference to an elected government. He's supposed to be neutral. It will embarrass his father. Plus, yesterday, he used very intemperate language about Paul Burrell, and it was actually a 4-letter word he used. So this is a guy that's not in a good place mentally, isn't he? How do you think that's going to influence what happens today? Just his mental state, the fact that he seems to be so angry and clearly very unhappy.
Well, I think, of course, we have to remember that this is not a jury trial, so it's just a judge here. Juries tend to be more moved by emotion and so forth, whereas a judge is better able to distinguish fact from fiction and emotion and so forth and get to the core of the case. But you're quite right. So much of what we've seen here are, we thought we were going to get a smoking gun from Prince Harry yesterday, but it turned out all we got was a damp squib. There were no bombshells that were being revealed, and what we just saw really was a person who had saw the press as the enemy, and he's had, 25 years to foment in his mind this idea of the press being a far greater threat than they really are. And so just like in the 1950s with communists in America, there were Reds under the bed. I think Prince Harry's suffering from much the same thing, as seeing the press being engaged in evil practices, when actually, as we've now been demonstrated, a lot of the grievances he had were about things that were already in the public domain, things that were written by other newspapers before the Mirror got hold of them, interviews that Princess Diana had given, which were then quoted. In fact, as we've seen here now, Clarence House issuing a statement about the prince's medical condition.
Rafe, how long will he... do you know what I'm thinking about this morning when we're watching this? The timing of these cases compared to the release of Spare. Would he have had any choice as such in terms of the timing of these legal cases coming to court? Because in a way, what he probably would have been wiser to do was get all the court cases out of the way and then release Spare. Because in a way, because the barristers can use Spare against him.
And they are using Spare against him, that's quite right. But of course, you have to remember, this is not just Prince Harry's case. There are 3 other cases going along with this, one including an actor and an actress from Coronation Street, and the other involving the ex-wife of the comedian Paul Whitehouse. That's all done. Those 4 are going to set the level of damages. So this is not a sole, even though we're portraying it as such, this is actually part of a wider thing. And of course, this is all related to the wider press battles that Hugh Grant and others have been doing with this same barrister. So it's all part of that wider package. There's no timing that he has control of in this matter, which is why also we had, starting yesterday, the trial in America, which we should just briefly touch on, because the courts in America, the judge has ruled that the President of America has 1 week in which to disclose the immigration visa application that Prince Harry completed. They're not compelled to do so, but if after a week they haven't revealed this immigration application, then the court will actually intervene and will decide this matter.
That is huge news. Just so that anybody's tuning in, just to understand what that means. So this is an organisation which is demanding to see Harry's visa application, because we know in the book he confessed to drug use. If he didn't confess to that on his visa application, then it could make his visa application null and void. He could get kicked out of America and never go back.
That's right. So the Heritage Foundation is the world's preeminent conservative right-wing think tank, and it's had the Department for Homeland Security in its crosshairs for years, challenging it about immigration and migrant issues, much as we see here with channel crossings and so forth. And, of course, what they want to see is that there are no double standards being applied here when people applied to come into the country. So there are two questions on the immigration form about drug use. Has he answered both of those honestly? If he has answered them honestly, why did the Department of Homeland Security allow him in? If he didn't answer them honestly, then they're going to say that he should be kicked out. Now, of course, in 2010, Pete Doherty, the singer from the Libertines, flew into JFK and had to get back on another flight out of here. In 2013, Nigella Lawson, the celebrity cook, was stopped from getting onto a flight to America. Now, it doesn't mean that Prince Harry will be kicked out forever or even will be kicked out. Nigella Lawson was able to get a visa after a prolonged process, but it certainly is not something that you can look at lightly.
Why Nigella? Was it her brownies?
Yes.
Too much sugar, so fattening.
Gave the munchies, no.
Well, this is exciting. So basically, his visa might get torn up. He's coming home.
Twist in the tail.
Harry's coming home, folks.
Remember, we are going to bring you all the coverage of Prince Harry's time in the High Court, as well as Dan's verdict. You don't want to miss that from Dan Wootton tonight at 9 p.m. I didn't watch Dan last night. I'm sorry, Dan. I normally do. I didn't get around to it. But I think he's got some actors, hasn't he, recreating the courtroom scene.
He has. Yeah, this is great news for strawberry blonde actors everywhere the next couple of days. I won't say the G word because apparently it's offensive.
Yeah, right. The Prime Minister is in Washington today to seek a military-style economic alliance with the US to counter the rise of China and, bizarrely, the risk of AI.
He will also speak to congressional and business leaders about more support for Ukraine.
So joining us now is former Minister and Labour MP Dennis McShane. Good morning, Dennis. First of all, can I just have any reaction from you about the news that this court case that we're looking at in London is significant? Of course it is, but an equally significant one, arguably, going on in America, which might see Harry's visa rescinded. What would you make of that? And is this the kind of thing Rishi Sunak's going to have to talk to Biden about this afternoon over a bit of tea?
I don't think so. I must say it's a lot more interesting than Mr. Schofield, a man of whom I'd never heard until about 10 days ago, and whom I'm told is the most important human being on planet Earth. Harry is important, and what you've just told us is pretty astonishing. If he did not fill in that immigration form correctly, then bingo, he could be back living in Wolverhampton or somewhere before long.
But let's talk about this meeting today with Sunak and Joe Biden. Sunak might have to kick that issue into the long grass and pick up the phone to him in a few months if Harry does get kicked out of America. But what will they discuss today, Dennis? What's important to them both?
It's very difficult to see. I just checked the New York Times and the Washington Post, and none of them mention Mr. Sunak's visit. He doesn't have much status in the United States. He's not Margaret Thatcher. He's not Tony Blair. He's not Boris Johnson. Joe Biden made very clear he was angry that Mr. Sunak kept delaying on sorting out the Northern Ireland protocol problem, now with the so-called Windsor framework. So that's earned him his entry into the White House. What they're actually going to talk about, I mean, I can go into details. Obviously, Britain supports the campaign against Ukraine. So does the US. So does all of Europe. Smaller countries in the Baltic states are giving a much greater share of their GDP in arms and help to Ukraine than we are. But, you know, we're up there with everybody else. And for the rest, Mr. Biden's very worked up about artificial intelligence, but he had a big meeting with the EU on that a few days ago, and Britain didn't even ask to take part in that. So I just don't quite know what's happened to the so-called special relationship. I mean, Joe Biden never mentions it. Not quite sure what Mr. Sunak will get out of this, though his spinners will tell you it's all going to be, it's all been wonderful.
Obviously, you mentioned the AI issue there, Dennis. So our understanding is that Rishi Sunak wants the centre for the policing of AI, the monitoring of the ethics, effectively, and the regulation around AI to be in the UK. Joe Biden wants it, understandably, to be in America. That, I think, will be a particularly interesting outcome to see who wields any sort of influence.
Yes, America met with the European Union, what's called the TTC, the Trade Technology Committee, which was set up between America, the EU and Canada. They are in the driving seat of global policy on AI. We've certainly got very excited about AI in Britain in the last, 2 weeks, 3 weeks. It's AI. But the rest of the world's been worried about this, chewing on this bone for quite a long time. And I'd be very surprised if, since so much investment's happening in the European Union, so much in North America, that Britain, which just doesn't invest in tech any longer, or manufacturing or modern industries, is going to actually grab any big slice of this pie. We should participate as a European nation, I think, with the Americans, and get in that way, which is more sensible than try to pretend we're still a superpower.
OK, thank you, Dennis. Dennis McShane there. The line was just breaking up at the end. I particularly like the picture on the back of Dennis's wall there. Rocks and sea, if you're listening on the radio. Beautiful.
And it's going to be a rocky time for Rishi Sunak in America.
Very good.
The Democratic Party, they have a cultural issue with the Conservative Party. And, of course, I mean, it's the political enemy, isn't it? But also, I think, with Britain generally, it's not an Anglophile party. So I think Rishi's got his work cut out.
If you think about the fact that, of course, Biden didn't even bother coming over for the coronation.
It was a shocking insult. Don't give me that baloney that the last coronation there was no US president. The world has changed. And by the way, you know, they always obsess over the chemistry, the relationship between Sunak and Biden. The only relationship Biden's got is with his team of nurses.
Oh, absolutely. And have you seen a more pointed display of athleticism and youth than Rishi Sunak bouncing down the steps of his aeroplane?
Yeah, love him or hate him.
That was not accidental.
He's got some acceleration. He's got pace, that boy.
Because, of course, Biden is known for falling down aeroplane steps fairly regularly. Rishi practically took two at a time when he emerged onto the tarmac. Right, still to come this morning, house prices have fallen for the first time on an annual basis in 11 years. We'll have more on that and more with Liam Halligan next. You're with GB News.
First and foremost, I'm a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. Every Sunday from 11. Join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News has its own late-night paper preview show, Headliners, where comedians take you through the next day's top news stories. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper, we've got it covered for you. Headliners, every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
Breaking news just in, security staff at Heathrow have announced the dates of their industrial action. It is widespread. They're going to walk out virtually every weekend from the end of June to the end of August. Really? Members of the Unite Union are involved in a long-running dispute with Heathrow over pay. That is bad news for holiday makers.
Bang goes the much-needed Great British Getaway. We'll bring you more on that shortly, but a couple of downbeat economic indicators today. House prices have fallen annually for the first time in 11 years.
And the Organisation for Economic Cooperation and Development, the OECD, says the UK is on course to have one of the highest inflation rates in the G20 this year, narrowly missing the title only by earthquake-struck Turkey and drought-ridden Argentina. Well, Liam Halligan is here. How have we managed to get into that leaderboard?
Well, the OECD is a Paris-based think tank, highly respected. They've been around for a long time. The OECD, of course, is all the advanced industrialised countries, the 28 economies in the world that see themselves as advanced. They've always had a bit of a downer on Brexit, if we're honest, and a bit like the IMF, the OECD's been saying for months and months that Britain's going into recession this year, but now we're getting on for halfway through the year economically, and we're still not in recession, so they've got to change their... Meanwhile, Germany are. Yeah, indeed, so they've got to start changing their numbers to accord with the facts on the ground rather than the forecasts. Though the broadcasters they like to report the bad forecast rather than the good facts on the ground. Let's have a look at how these OECD forecasts have changed for the UK over recent months. Back in January, the OECD were forecasting that in 2023, the UK would shrink 0.6%, minus 0.6% growth there. In March, they said we're still going to shrink in 2023, but by less, 0.3%. Now they're saying that we're actually going to grow by 0.2%. There you go, 0.25%. And the forecast for 2024 is plus 1%. Shambles. But these are pretty vapid, thin growth numbers, but they are growth numbers. They're not recession, which means the public finances should get better, a bit more tax revenue in. But they are saying that we are rightly, I agree, more inflation prone than a lot of the other big economies.
And inflation is a problem, but actually that R word, recession, that's politically important as well.
It is politically important.
Sunak and Hunt not presiding over a recession.
You know, there are academic papers that I used to read in my academic past.
Do you not have a girlfriend?
What was I thinking? Yeah, I had a girlfriend as well, you know.
You juggled?
Yeah, multitask. Academics doing studies of the number of times the word recession appears in newspapers, and it's like a leading indicator. Once people like me start talking about recession, people who run businesses, they think, oh, I'm not going to build that factory, I'm not going to make that investment, I'm not going to take on that extra painter and decorator if I've got a little painting and decorating business. We kind of talk ourselves into these things. And the fact that the likes of the IMF, the likes of the OECD are saying, actually, the UK, you're all right, lads, you're not going to go into recession. It does make a difference. Economy is psychology, and of course, economics feeds into politics. You're exactly right. If we're not talking about recession, it means that we're more likely to avoid recession.
Now, we've been talking about house prices regularly. Liam, the first fall today that we've discussed, because we've both been going, well, this is great, house prices are still going up, this is unusual.
That's because we're homeowners. There are many people across the country, you know, 25 to 34-year-olds in this country, they're less likely to own a home than at any time since the 1930s, and they're paying more for their rent than at any time since the 1930s because of the unaffordability crisis. So yes, it's interesting, the Nationwide, so there are two surveys that have come out in the last week. The first one is from the Halifax and the second one is from the Nationwide. The Halifax one is today. Earlier this week, the Nationwide said house prices have fallen since last May 2022 to May 2023 by 3.4%. That was the first time in 14 years that Halifax index had said that. And now you've got the Nationwide saying 1%. So these are falls, they're quite small falls, but they do indicate that the market is now turning down. Why? Because interest rates have been going up. We've had 12 interest rate rises. We've probably got another one to come on June the 22nd. That's pushing up mortgage costs. Now, you will read in the papers other indices saying, oh, house prices are still going up, house prices are still going up, it's fine, it's fine. But they tend to be indices that are compiled by estate agents, and they tend to be indices of asking prices. Halifax and Nationwide, because they're massive mortgage lenders, they use mortgages actually offered once deals have been done. So these guys tend to be a better indicator of what's actually happening. So to be clear, this new Halifax index today, down 1% since May. The Nationwide index last week, down 3.4% since May. These are small falls in the grand scheme of things, but they'll still please a lot of people trying to get on the housing ladder and worry people maybe if they've got lots of debt on their existing home.
OK, lovely. Thank you, Liam.
OK, well, look, still to come, the game-changing new weight loss drug designed to slim down the nation, medical revolution or the latest lazy solution. We'll have more after your morning news with Aaron.
Good morning to you. It's 11:33. Let's get the headlines from the GB newsroom. In the last few minutes, security guards at Heathrow Airport have announced the dates of their latest walkout. More than 2,000 Unite members will go on strike for 31 days between the 24th of June and the 27th of August, most of the weekends. And that covers the start of the school holidays and the August bank holiday weekend. Officers from both Terminals 3 and 5 will take industrial action for the first time. The union's General Secretary, Sharon Graham, says the airport has got its priorities wrong and strikes will continue until a fair pay offer is made. The Duke of Sussex says he believes phone hacking took place on an industrial scale across 3 of the Mirror Group newspapers between 1996 and 2009, and that he will feel it an injustice if the High Court doesn't rule in his favour. He is taking place in a second day of cross-examination in his claim against the publisher. Mirror Group newspapers, he and his lawyers have selected 33 articles in which they believe unlawful techniques were used to get the story. The publisher denies wrongdoing. The Prince must bring facts or overwhelming evidence to prove his case. The Prime Minister's arrived in Washington ahead of his 4th meeting with the US President tomorrow. Rishi Sunak is expected to reaffirm Western support for Ukraine with Joe Biden, in addition to addressing the growing threat of China, climate change and artificial intelligence. The Health Secretary, Steve Barclay, says regulation would mitigate the risk of AI while protecting the benefits.
I was up at Blackpool Victoria Hospital where they're using AI to pick up cancers that wouldn't be visible to the human eye. Extra 20% detection rate on those that were too small for people to see. But alongside there are risks as well to AI. So it's important we don't let those risks crowd out the opportunities. We need to look at this internationally, to work with partners, including the US, to get the right regulatory framework in place.
And Pope Francis has given his last general audience at the Vatican before having surgery on his abdomen this afternoon. The Vatican says they decided the operation was required because of a hernia and he will stay in hospital for several days to recover. The 86-year-old has suffered a number of ailments recently, spending 5 days in hospital in March with bronchitis. 2 years ago, he had surgery on his large intestine. More on all of our stories on our website, gbnews.com. And for now, it is back to Bev and Mark.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for gold and silver investment.
And they will be right with you after a quick look at today's markets. The pound will buy you $1.2455 and €1.1639. The price of gold, £1,578.07 per ounce. And the FTSE 100 is at 7,627 points.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for physical investment.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, no, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment.
I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better.
Crop failures, famine, war, suffering on a scale completely unimaginable.
We are putting the cart before the horse. As Charles I said at the scaffold, he was the true defender of liberty.
Yeah, I've completely derailed the conversation.
Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Co, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is two new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates. Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat. Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Mornings on GB News.
Yes.
Welcome back to the point. Pay attention, we're back on the telly.
The problem is that your guests are so entertaining.
I know that always happens. We end up chatting in the break. Emma Webb is here. And of course, former Lib Dem Minister Norman Baker is with us this morning. Right, we've got a slightly shorter show on a Wednesday. Did they tell you it's shorter on a Wednesday?
I'm furious about this. We've been upstaged by Oliver Dowden and Angela Rayner, who are in for the PM and Starmer on Prime Minister's
How
questions.
exciting that'll be.
I think that's all right. I think it'll be good. Mark Longhurst will do it beautifully. We know that. Right, let's go to some stories that we're going to be cracking on with this morning, guys. Before then, Emma, Britain is the best Western nation to live in, say ethnic minorities.
Yes, very interesting poll done by a think tank called British Future to mark the 75th anniversary of the arrival of, I believe the ship was called Empire Windrush, the Windrush generation. And so this survey has found that 80% of ethnic minorities believe that Britain is a better place to live than the US, France or Germany. Now that, from the phrasing of the question, could mean that they have certain views about what those other countries are like to live in if you're an ethnic minority. Less, 73% of white respondents thought that Britain was a better place to live than those countries. But what's interesting about this also is that those ethnic minorities, so 67%, still say that they have faced discrimination. So even if they do believe that they are still facing discrimination, the overall consensus is that Britain is one of the best, most welcoming places to live.
Right, now this does not fit the woke consensus
No,
that
it
Britain
does
is a
not.
racist hellhole. And just as a matter of research, I thought I would do it maybe once in the 2 days we've been together, right? I've just been on the Guardian website, and you won't believe it, but they're not running this story that Britain is not a racist country.
I wonder why that might be.
And if they could find anything to leverage a divisive attitude that somehow Britain is terribly xenophobic, there's no material for them here. Those on the woke left will hate this story.
Oh, I'm sure it will be as conveniently ignored as that polling that showed that 55% of the British public thought that Black Lives Matter had made racial relations worse in this country.
Yeah.
So we can add that to the pile.
I'm sorry to say, I don't want to bang the drum, but shame on The Guardian for not running that story.
What do you think?
You are banging the drum. But listen, no, I mean, I think by and large people in this country are tolerant. And I think it's perfectly true that if you take America is hugely racist in the way it approaches matters. I mean, being a black person in America means you've got a chance of getting shot for walking down the street. You would never have that over here. So we are more tolerant. Actually, I think of it to be controversial. I think the British public is more tolerant than perhaps the Home Secretary is with some of her language.
Oh.
Well, there you go, dropping a little bit of a spicy one there. Yeah, I mean, it's good. It's a good news story, and we like to grab those, don't we?
Yeah,
on GBNews?
absolutely. Norman, this is a slightly depressing story. It's very depressing, actually. The police having failed to give up on catching burglars.
It's an astonishing story in the Daily Star. I mean, I presume it's true because it's in the Star. But I was a crime prevention minister in the government, and therefore I tried to prevent crime. And one of the ways you prevent crime is by making sure the police do their job properly. And there are areas of the country where apparently there are no arrests anymore and no prosecutions for burglary. 48% of areas in England and Wales show 0 convictions for burglaries in 3 years. This is absolutely astonishing.
You know, I actually got burgled during lockdown, and
where were you? You were meant to be at home.
I actually was at home. So they broke into the building, and my bike was outside of the front door, but was still within the confines of the building. Someone broke in, somehow stole the bike without me hearing it, given that I was working on the other side of the door. And you know what the police said when I called them up?
Go on.
They said to look for my bike on Gumtree.
Yes.
They said very often, sometimes people find their bikes on Gumtree. They didn't do a thing.
Burglary in Britain has been decriminalised. That's effectively where we are now.
It is. That is where we are, and that's a phrase used by the Police Federation. And the thing is that there are not more burglaries because nobody realises that. And we're now telling them, I suppose, that this is the case. But I mean, you can burgle someone and get away with it.
And it's a devastating crime.
It's an invasion of your privacy, an invasion of your personality.
It is. And what will happen?
Meanwhile, they're arresting and prosecuting people for things that they say.
And do you know what will happen ultimately when, you're absolutely right, Emma, when these kind of things happen, people will start protecting their own houses. They will start putting more cameras on the front of them. They will start, and then they will start going to bed with a baseball bat. This is the problem. And then
and then they'll get arrested for attacking the burglar.
Can we talk about this NHS injection, Emma, weight loss? The government is saying this is going to be a gift for those people who need to lose weight.
Yes, fascinating story. We heard recently about these weight loss jabs. So this is Rishi has announced that they're going to have this scheme to administer drugs to people who are obese. 12 million adults, and that's not even counting the children in this country, are obese. And obviously there are risks of diabetes, cancer, and that puts huge pressures on the NHS. But I think very often this is framed in terms of the cost to the NHS. I think there's actually something much more profound in terms of the consequences of this for society, because this is really dragging us down as a nation. And I think we can't really overstate what those subtle implications might be for us as a society. However, I do think that the problem with this is that as we keep seeing with the sort of nanny statery, there's this culture of always putting our responsibility outside of ourselves. Yeah. And I think that this is not to say, they're not saying that this is a replacement for exercise and a good diet, but yet again, this is removing people's personal responsibility. If you want to lose weight, eat less food, exercise more. It's not more complicated than that.
Guys, we've come to the end of our show. I'm so sorry. It was brief. It was beautiful. Mark, it's been lovely.
Thanks for having me, viewers and listeners, and Bev and the team.
Right, so coming up next is GB News Live with Mark Longhurst. This has been To The Point. I will be back tomorrow with Tom Harwood. See you at 9:30.
Coming up, brace yourself for day 2 of Harry's High Court testimony as we continue our exclusive coverage of his assault on the British Free Press. Expect more bombshells like this using our Harry.
The phrase two-faced may have come from a voicemail. That's how I've always seen him. I've never smoked a joint in that pub or in my father's house.
So join me, Samantha Markle, Lady Colin Campbell and Jim Davidson for Harry's Evidence, The Verdict, Day 2, coming up on Dan Wootton tonight, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m, only on GB News.
I'm Alex Deakin. This is your latest weather update from the Met Office for GB News. More of the same today, but there are signs of a change on the horizon. For today, though, it's a fine and sunny one for the vast majority. Again, the eastern side of the country likely to stay fairly cloudy. Grass pollen and UV levels very high in some locations, and the pressure is high. This high pressure has been giving us the fine weather for quite some time now, but still bringing in the cloud overnight, and it's been another drab start to the day. That cloud is slowly breaking up, but parts of the east coast are going to stay pretty grey again. Northern Scotland also staying fairly cloudy, but through the central belt and most other areas, if it isn't already sunny, it will turn sunny, and temperatures responding to that sunshine getting over 20 Celsius, whereas again on that east coast, particularly with a nagging wind across East Anglia, temperatures really struggling in the low teens. Through this evening, again, most places fine and pleasantly warm, but then the cloud just spills back in once more overnight. A repeat scenario where it stays clearest in the west, temperatures again dropping down to single figures. Most places start Thursday at 8 to 10 Celsius. Most will start dry, but the cloud could be thick enough over the East Midlands, parts of eastern England for a little bit of drizzle here and there for a time in the morning. That should peter out. And again, the cloud will break up. A sunny start for West Wales, southwest England and elsewhere. Many places seeing that cloud breaking up, but again, parts of the east may stay fairly glum. Perhaps a bit brighter across parts of East Anglia, with temperatures maybe a smidge higher. But again, coolest in the east, warmest in the west, temperatures getting into the low 20s, 23, 24, maybe a 25 Celsius in South Wales. But signs of a change as the sunshine turns increasingly hazy with high clouds spilling in from the southwest. And yes, that is some rain, just not far away from the southwest. It's going to push northwards, heavy thundery showers during the weekend, but as well as an increasing risk of some heavy showers, it's going to be turning hotter and more humid.
First and foremost, I'm a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the people's channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets,